Okay, so good morning, and here we are back in the Massif Central. It's a far lesser known region of France that most people foreign to France don't know that part of their territory. And until the motorways came about, the Massif Central was a place that was off the beaten track. Not too many people would go, though there is a lot of little historic and small towns and villages into it, but particularly what it is extraordinary for is the landscapes. And we will see the landscapes are very particular to that region. They are made of dormant volcanoes that have finished acting a long time ago, but you have that particular shape of the volcanoes that had that dome, and we'll see that in a minute. So here is a map of France. As you know, France is made of departments, and then on top of the departments are regions. So the Massif Central is more or less following these lines. It is made of 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, about 18 departments and some regions. We have here we have the we'll see that in a minute, because it has all changed. Everything has changed recently, and so I'll show you a map and how it's composed of. A few days before, oh, no, I'm already there, sorry. So here you have before 2016. So where the Massif Central was made of the Limousin, Auvergne, part of the Rhône-Alpes, part of the Languedoc-Roussillon, and part of the Midi-Pyrénées. As you can see in the map from after 2016, the regions have merged, and now the Massif Central, which is in the center, is made of the Nouvelle Aquitaine, Auvergne, Rhône-Alpes, and Occitanie. So 3 different regions, part of 3 different regions. A few dates. We have, because these, what I'm showing you is the fact that these dates are going to be very important in the way monuments are going to be kept properly or going to be demolished. So you have that 100-year war, that's France against England, between 1337 and 1453. And as I had shown you in another map, in another presentation, you have that constant movement of, oh, that territory is taken by the English, and then the French come back. And of course, all that is battled. And so all these beautiful towns are going to suffer from it. You have the religion wars between 1562 and 1685 that are going to see enormous damages, particularly in the religious buildings, because you had the Huguenots coming from one side, and then they lose to another, and so on. And so this is going to be important. The French Revolution, of course, started in 1789 and saw the abolition of anything, all the monasteries and so on. And all these monuments are going to be sold to privateers that are going to very often use these beautiful buildings as quarries and literally recycle the stones they were made of. And then you have Napoleon between 1795 and 1815. And this is going to show also some renewal sometimes, but some suffering for people and the buildings. So here is a physical map of France, and you can see the relief, so which is pretty minor here, becomes quite important with the Vosges and then the Alps, and down here in the Pyrenees. But in the center of the country, we have that region with all what we call these volcanoes. The term Puy that you see here with the Puy de Sancy, which is the highest peak of Massif Central with 6188 feet, the term Puy is qualifying these particular reliefs that were old volcanoes and that have the dome-like shapes. So the most important is the series of volcanoes called the Mont Doré, which is around here, the Mont de Cantal, which is here, with the Plomb de Cantal, which is the highest summit, 6,086 feet. The Massif de Cévennes is down here, with the Mont de Lozère, 5,054, Mont Aigual, 5141, and then across the Mont Mézenc with 5722. And this really provides the Massif Central with extraordinary landscapes. Here's the Puy de Sancy, so the highest one, and this is obviously taken more towards the fall, so the snow is already capping these beautiful mountains. It's part of an ancient, what they call stratovolcano, which has been inactive for about 220,000 years. The northern, sorry. The northern slopes are used for skiing, and so you have a whole series of cable cars and ski lift. It's that they were open since the early part of the 20th century. Here's a view of the beautiful mountain, and you can see these slopes. You can really, looking at that, you can feel you are in Switzerland, but this is in the center of France. This is during the summer seen from the Puy de Sancy towards the valley. And the Chêne de Puy in Auvergne, so that's in the northern part. So you can see that succession of dome-like reliefs that are these old volcanoes. It's about 25, the chain of the Chêne de Puy is 25 miles long. It includes 48 cinder cones, 8 lava domes, and 15 Mars and explosion craters. The Mars are these hollow, just like this, where often a lake would form. So here is a map, and you can go back at it and refer to see more or less where the regions are that I'm going to show you, and all the cities. So this part, you're going to have the, and myself even forget the name of the new regions, but the Aquitaine, the new Aquitaine is here, and then the southern part. So it's 3 regions, and I will qualify it every time. So as in most places in France and in Europe, I would say we find a lot of prehistoric stones and stelae. These are the stelae of Beaulieu that dates back to the 2nd century BCE. And on the right, another of these stelae, but is engraved and represents a human being. So this is called the Dame de Saint-Cernin, so the Lady of Saint-Cernin. So these are considered anthropomorphic stelae. Very recently, in digging a new highway across the Massif Central, they found a series of about 450 feet long area with a series of 30 stones that were unearthed and were saved thanks to that. So as you can see, they had collapsed and then being progressively covered with soil.
There's a half a stone left. I bought that for you.
Sorry, somebody has to mute himself. We just heard you, so you have to make sure that you remain muted. Let me make sure that I can, if I can mute you all. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to look at some big cities. Unfortunately, most of the big cities in the Massif Central have become rather industrial, and not all of them really took care of their patrimony. And this is sad. So Clermont-Ferrand, for example, which is in a valley, it's a beautiful location, has some nice churches and in the center, some old houses. But all the rest has been pretty much demolished to give place to these high-rise apartment buildings. So Clermont-Ferrand is in the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region. Finds its really changed its name. It was at first Augusto Nemetum, and then with the Franks after the Romans, Avernis, it completely changed to actually putting together the name of two cities, Clermont and Ferrand, and has become Clermont-Ferrand. The main church is the Cathedral Notre-Dame of the Assumption, that was founded in 1248. Now you can notice how dark the stone is, and this is definitely a volcanic stone. So this is a local stone, so you won't have the beautiful creamy stone as you have at Notre-Dame or even Chartres. But of course, they go to local quarries, and this is the kind of stone that exists around Clermont-Ferrand. So a lot of the buildings and the churches and so on will have that kind of aspect because of the local stone. It is, that region, by the way, of the Massif Central is also known for its Black Virgin. And I have shown you that many times. The cathedral houses the Notre-Dame de la Bonne Mort. It's an association actually with the Lady of Sorrow. So the Lady of the Good Death associated with the Lady of the Sorrow. And this is a particular pattern when you see the Virgin where she's seated on a throne and has Jesus on her laps looking towards the believers. And she's really presenting Christ to the believers in the church. So she becomes part of the church, if you want. I've talked extensively about these Black Virgin that are the result of probably an influence from Isis, the goddess from Egypt, and with her son Horus. I'm not going to go back into that. This is not the purpose of the talk. But really interesting because that particular virgin is going to be quite influential on on the statues around there. Some examples of Notre-Dame de Chalut and the Puy-Dôme, and then this one, which is at the Metropolitan Museum. So very same type of composition, the way the Virgin is set. You can see though a difference in the pigments. You can see that this one that shows a lot of the original wood, but still has some pigments in the fold of the clothes. In the cathedral, we find, and they found rather recently, some wonderful frescoes. There is that belief that France doesn't have a lot of frescoes, and that is not true. The thing is, during the wars of religion and during the revolution, a lot of these were hidden. They were whitewashed. And so only if a preacher or somebody around the church was smart enough when he saw some of that whitewash flaking off and saw something under, they were able to save these. This is in the St. George Chapel And it shows the scenes of the martyrdom of St. George, and inspired by his legend. He was, and I don't know if you see, yeah, you can see it from far away, where he's going to be quartered between two trees. He's going to get the torture of the wheel and the torture of the red hot boots. So the poor man is going to suffer a lot of hardship. And then in the lower register, you see an equestrian combat where the Crusaders put to flight and pursue the Saracens. In the church too, you can find a jacquemart, and the jacquemart is a kind of a animated clock, if you want. So you have the whole mechanism of the clock, but the jacquemart are typically figures, sometimes life-size figures, in this case 170 meter high, so 1.70 meter high, so which is a pretty good size figure, life size. And they hit the bells that are typically behind at different times a day. In this case, you have one every hour, and then you have another automaton which is going to strike the bell at the half hour. They represent in the center time, and then the two automatons there are Mars and Faunus. The Basilica Notre-Dame-du-Port, so it's not a cathedral, it has particular privileges given by the Pope, was founded in the 12th century, and also houses a miraculous Black Virgin. You can see it here. It's very different. It's a much more friendly type of attitude that goes back to this Byzantine evolution of the Theotokos into what they call the Panagia Eleusa, which is a virgin of tender mercy. So you can see here that the child is touching the face of the mother. The apse of the basilica was, as you can see, rather dark, but you have these beautiful columns with historiated capitals. And lately, they decided to restore it and probably make it lighter for the believers. And it's the difference is so striking. I think it's blinding almost. So be ready. This is what it is now. So after restoration, the choir is now painted in that kind of ochre yellow. But it makes the capitals come out beautifully, and they've been cleaned, of course. And here you can see the quality, of course. These are so fascinating because they all tell a story, and they need interpretation very often. But I think the difference between the old choir and then after painting is quite startling. The old center is beautiful. It still has these houses with showing the timber, so that half timber house, as they call. One is the apothecary, and these are just different neighborhoods, still lived in houses. Also in the main square in Clermont-Ferrand is the statue of Vercingétorix, who was supposedly born in that region. And he's astride on a war horse and brandishing a sword. There is a sentence on the pedestal there that says, "J'ai pris les armes pour la liberté de tous." I took up arms for the liberty of all. Now, the interesting thing is that sculpture was sculpted by Frédéric Bartholdi, and I hope that name is familiar to you because Frédéric Bartholdi is the one who created and designed the Statue of Liberty that is in New York, in Manhattan. Vercingétorix was a Gaulish chieftain that was able to literally gather all the tribes around to go and fight Caesar when he started invading Europe. He was actually elected king in 52 BC, but finally in 53 BC, he lost against Caesar, and this is when Caesar completed his taking of Europe. Montluçon is just northwest of Clermont-Ferrand. It's a smaller town, but has the chance, if you want, to house the castle of the Dukes of Bourbon. The name comes from Monte Lucii, which is the Mount of Lucius, not the light, but the Mount of Lucius. It was taken during the 100-Year War in 1171 and then retaken in 1181. At that time, the English were finally booted out of the region. The castle at that time was rebuilt and more or less the way it is, and definitely improved upon in 1529 with Henry IV. Same beautiful old houses in the center. This is one of the main squares, the Place Saint-Pierre. Not far from there is the city of Aubusson. I shouldn't say the town of Aubusson, not the city. It's a small town in which, in the 14th century, the tapestry industry was brought from Flanders. In the 16th and 17th century, it reached the peak of its fame, and Colbert gave it the title of Royal Manufacturer. There's a river that goes along there and apparently has some qualities, if you want, that helps the pigment to be fixed on the textiles. Unfortunately, after 1685, during the revocation, at the occasion of the revocation of the Edit Nantes, quite a number of the skilled workers, the weavers, who were Protestant at the time, left Aubusson because they were in danger. They built in 2016 a new museum because the old one was at capacity. And so they built the Cité de la Tapisserie, so the city of tapestry, that houses a lot of tapestry made in Aubusson, the old-fashioned one, like Éole, made of wool and silk, 1650. But then the industry itself that had been declining during the revolution, tapestries lost their purpose, which was quite important for quite a long time, particularly in the chateaus. It was preventing the humidity to come through from the walls. It was also preventing the sound to have the echo. It was buffering the sound, but definitely they were decorative. And this was wonderful, and also a kind of decor that you could move along. So you could fold this tapestry and take it to the next castle. I'm talking about rich people, of course. In the 20th century, the industry really saw a revival, and that's particularly because of the artist Jean Lurçat. Jean Lurçat really brought tapestry back to life and made some extraordinary composition that I show you just two here, but was really able to do quite a bit. And nowadays, the industry is rather stagnant, but it's one of the only places in France where they still restore the old tapestries. Thiers is also in that same region. It's a small town also, but known for the industry of knife making. And literally 70% of the quality knives in France are produced in that small town. It's on a steep hill that overlooks the Durol Valley. And it is thanks to that gradient that they have the hydropower to have the grinding mills that are going to help them to sharpen the knives and so on. We'll see that in a minute. It's a very pretty little town with, again, that typical type of architecture. Beautiful old bridge, medieval bridge. There are earthquakes in Thiers, and that might be explain the proximity of the volcano. It's a terrain that is still fertile in earthquakes. But this shows you, for example, that Creux de l'Enfer, which shows that small river that comes there, and you can imagine whenever there is big rains, how it would fall and can cause some damages. But here is the Museum of the Cutlery. The House of the Forestman is one of these old houses. You can see they're called the Forestman because of the sculptures on that upper floor. But it shows, it houses a whole series of knives. But it also shows you, they demonstrate how people were literally sharpening the blades of these knives. They were lying down on their stomach in a very uncomfortable position and had these wheels that were turning and allowing them to grind the edge of the blades. More familiar to you for sure is the city of Vichy. Vichy knows for its thermal bath. The fame of Vichy started more or less in the end of the 17th century with the Marquise de Sévigné, who was a patient, and she would come to the bath because she had at the time a paralysis in her hands, and she was quite a writer, so as you can imagine, she needed her hands, and apparently the cures, these particular waters, helped her regain the use of her hands. In the second part of the 18th century, the two daughters of Louis XV, Adélaïde and Victoire of France, came to Vichy for the first time, then returned in 1785, but they were not happy with the lack of comfort. And so they pushed their nephew, by that time who was king, is Louis XVI, to build a more roomier, a roomier and more luxurious thermal bath, which he actually did in 1787, so just 2 years before the revolution. After the revolution in 1799, the mother of Napoleon came, Laetitia Bonaparte, and came to the cure. It became a real fashion. At the next century, Charles X, the second king after the revolution, helped the expansion of the hydrotherapeutic facilities. But it's particularly in the 19th century that Vichy became a station à la mode, a station à la mode, where all kinds of celebrities would flock. And it is under Napoleon III that they really did. They built some dikes to prevent the river that you see there to flood the city. They landscaped about 32 acres of gardens to replace the old marshes. And then they made beautiful boulevards and streets with chalets and pavilions that were built for the emperor and the court. A large casino was built in 1865, and then a small rail station, and that's really what brought the people where they could come easily from Paris and other big cities. So this multiplied the number of inhabitants and visitors. Now, after the Second French Empire, the Belle Époque marked the second large construction campaign in Vichy. In 1903, the Opera House is going to be designed with the hall of springs and a large bath. The Park of the Springs was enclosed by 1900 with a beautiful metal gallery that actually was transferred from the World Fair of 1889. And then a lot of private mansions started being erected for people that wanted to spend more time. So by 1900, they were welcoming 40,000 people that were coming just for the cures. And that figure rose to nearly 100,000 before the onset of the First World War. Vichy became a summertime music capital of France, but unfortunately the First World War would put a brutal end to that development. Now, a very important historical moment was when from 1940 to 42, the Vichy Regime was the nominal government of all France, except for Alsace-Lorraine, and settled in Vichy. So this was a government that compromised with the German. While Paris remained the actual capital of France, the government chose to relocate to the town of Vichy and became the de facto capital of the French state. Following the Allied landings in French North Africa in 1942, the southern France was also militarily occupied by Germany and Italy to protect the Mediterranean coastline. And of course, as you know, finally the Germans lost, and at the end, Pétain, who was the head of the government, was tried and convicted for treason, was originally sentenced to death. But because of his age, he was in his late 80s at that time, the sentence was commuted to life in prison. He died shortly after. So let's look at Vichy. And in Vichy, we won't have very old medieval buildings, but it's really the turn of the 19th century to the 20th century, which marked it. And so a lot of things show the Art Nouveau type of style. So this is what is now called the Congress Center, but used to be the casino and the opera house, built in 1865. And you can see here on the left how it developed from this building to an addition there, and having both thermal baths, but also the casino, but also the opera house. It became known as La Reine des Villes d'Eau, so the queen of the thermal cities. Here is a poster by Louis Tauzin showing all the gentry going around. And by the way, a lot of English would come down to Vichy for the cure. It was not only for the real cure, but definitely all the entertainment around, as I say, casino, opera, cafes, cabarets, and everything. And then on the right is one of these thermal centers. This is the one center of the domes. In the 1950s and 60s, they started to have visitors like the Prince Rainier of Monaco, and all kinds of actors would come to spend some time and see their peers. This is the famous covered gallery that surrounds the Parc des Sources. It's 2,300 feet long. In that region, as I said, you have large cities, but not too many. They're really Clermont-Ferrand, Saint-Étienne, and Limoges, but all the others are these very nice and picturesque towns that typically keep their patrimony in better condition. This is Moulins, with the cathedral in the front, and then the Église du Sacré-Cœur, so a Sacred Heart, and then the river, and always have these beautiful rivers crossing the town. Before the French Revolution, Moulins was the capital of the province of the Bourbon and the seat for the Dukes of Bourbon. The cathedral also houses a Black Virgin, Black Madonna. As you can see, she used to have a lily, hold a lily there, but it was broken. And then with the other hand, she's surrounding her young son on her laps. Moulins also has the beautiful triptych. It's by Jean A. And for a long time, Jean A was considered the same as the Maître de Moulins. And so that's why Moulins triptych. So there was that artist we didn't know the name of, who was the master of Moulins. So now more or less everybody agrees that Jean A, an artist we knew the name of, would be the same as the Maître de Moulins. This is an extraordinary piece showing the Virgin in glory in the center and surrounded by the two donors, who are the Duke Peter II and his wife Anne of France on the other side with their patron saint. You can see Saint Peter with the key, and then Saint Anne, the mother of the Virgin, and their little daughter in the back. Also in the cathedral, a beautiful Deposition of Christ. This is made of stone, but all polychrome, with Nicodemus, Salome, Mary Magdalene, St. John, Mary, the mother of James, and then Joseph of Arimathea. Again, very picturesque little streets and old houses. And also there, they have a tower with a jacquemart. So these figures that are striking. So you have the large bell that is stricken for the hours, and then there are some smaller ones for the half hours. And so you see these very large figures with a hammer. And so in due time, they become animated. The city of Salers, or the town of Salers, I should say again, these are not big enough to see them, has that very typical architecture that you find in the Massif Central. Again, that dark stone that is a volcanic stone. This town is known for its AOC wine, so it's Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, which qualifies a quality. I mean, it really guarantees a certain level of quality of the products. And that can be for wine, it can be for cheeses. Here in Salers, you find the making of the Cantal cheeses and the Salers cheese, which is less known. There's also a particular breed of cattle. It's called the Celeste Breed, that is originated in this commune. The gate of the Belfroy. But to show you, this is a little town, and then you look out from the town, and here is the type of landscape you will see from there, these extraordinary views of these old volcanoes and valleys and so on. It's absolutely magical. Beside towns and cities, you also have some beautiful abbeys old abbey. This is the Abbey of Shezdru, Casa Dei, not chaise in the sense of seat, but in fact of casa, of the house of God. It's an abbey that was founded in 1344 and really caused the development of the whole town around it. So it brought in, once you had an abbey and a monastery all around, the advantage is that the population would come around and benefit from the monasteries, would often sometimes work in the monasteries. But the monasteries would guarantee to them, for example, being taken care of when they were sick. And also for some young boys, the education. Unfortunately, again, during the religious war, the monastery was plundered, was ransacked, as most of all the monasteries around. Here's the way it used to look. As you can see, the church that is still standing, but then you had all the monastic buildings around that included, of course, the habitation for the monks, but also typically a hostel for visitors. You had an infirmary for the sick, and you had school, and then of course the big gardens that were around, not leisure gardens, but medicinal or just vegetable gardens. Inside, the church owns a very beautiful collection of tapestries that are hanging there, but also it shows one of their original members became the first pope in Avignon, so the Clément VI. He was a monk here before becoming a pope. And here is the reclined figure of his tomb. Above the entrance, a much more recent organ and the tribune, a marvelous tribune, all sculpted with a narrative with the story of Saint Cecilia, who is the patron saint of music, playing the organ. And here you can see Saint Cecilia, and then you have angels blowing in trumpets and different instruments all around. Even what looks to be a statue of Apollo with his lyre. So a good, interesting mixture of mythology and religious themes. Also, some fresco again, and this is the Danse Macabre, so it's a scene of death, death that is surrounding people. 1470, they were in the middle of, they were just past the 100-Year War, and so death is an omnipresent theme. This was considered as a memento mori to remind people of the fragility of their lives. Here you can see death all around, clergy or people walking around. Another great abbey not too far from there is the Abbey of Lavaudieu. It was actually founded by the same founder of the Shezdru Abbey. Again, with all the wars around, only remains the church, whereas all the monastic buildings have been demolished. Here's the inside, and again, we see plenty of frescoes. This again was only discovered, these frescoes were only discovered in 1896. And they're quite remarkable. Here's Christ and Virgin Mary and John, of course. And then some martyrdom of saints around the main figures. And that other figure of Christ in a mandorla. And I don't know, I'm so sorry, this is not the proper title. Has still a beautiful cloister with a great array of columns, as you can see around it. The cloister dates back to 11th and 12th century. A very particular city is the city of Le Puy-en-Velay, and I mentioned it to you when I talked about the Black Madonnas. It's extraordinary because it's surrounded by these peaks, which are actually the core of old volcanoes. Just like if you look at Camelback Mountain or some of the mountains we have there, they are the core of old volcanoes. So they took advantage to build one church on top of one, and then the big, huge sculpture of Mary on the other. This was a major bishopric in the early medieval France, and was on the way to was part of that route to Santiago de Compostela. So the church had a major role in containing some relics that would attract pilgrims. The church that you see here, unfortunately, was demolished partly before 1836 and was reconstructed the way you see now. And again, we have these darker stones and that are so typical of the Massif Central. And here is the view of a much more recent Virgin built in the early 20th century. Inside, we have some beautiful frescoes. This is the Transfiguration of Christ, surrounded by the apostles and prophets. And here, Sede Sapientiae, which means the Virgin and Child, similar to these Black Madonnas that we have seen before, and surrounded by saints and angels. These are the very early representation of the Virgin, very stern and static. The church also used to house a Black Madonna that has been, as often in many of these churches, taken during the French Revolution and burned because, as you know, they were anti-clerical. So a replica has been sculpted, and you have it here, that is very similar to the original, because they found some drawings of the original, were able to replicate it. As typically these sculptures are dressed depending on the liturgy. So depending on the season or the particular feast, they put these extraordinary coats and capes on it, just allowing the head of Christ to come up and the head of the Virgin. But here is a drawing which showed the original statue that was then replicated. It is believed to come from the Middle East and have been offered to the city by St. Louis when he came back from the Crusades. And the beauty, and again, typical France, you always have these large terraces where you can enjoy the life of the city or the town. They're also known to make lace. This was in 1930. You could still see a very fashionable period for lace. It's now gone down a little bit, but here is a demonstration of working the lace with the spindles. It's a very, very tricky skill to master. Okay, I'm going to give you a little break. You can by now unmute yourself and go stretch your legs, get a cup of coffee, ask me questions, whatever.
So Anne, I have to comment.
Yes.
We were there in all these places. It's so exciting to see. We stayed with a French couple in Clermont. So the Black Church, we saw that. Of course, that was their local church. And Le Puy, we went there.
It's quite a fascinating place, isn't it?
Yes, yes. And that big square, we had a cappuccino on that there, and I saw the lace making. You're like revisiting our trip. It was so nice to do this with a couple from France because they knew where to take us. I wonder if you're also going to show us the ancient stone town. Do you have that? It's in the region also. It's it's supposed to be from the before the 1400s. The houses are just made of stones that are put together. There's no mortar used. So
I'm not sure which one you're talking about. We have a lot coming, so.
Okay, all right, well, I'll let you know, but thank you, this has been marvelous.
You know, again, all these regions, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine and she says, I am from the Massif Central. And I said, where from? And she says, Montluçon. And you know, because I have to be very selective because otherwise I can't show you. I tried to give you a good.
Yeah, no, it's a good flavor.
I'm giving you a sampling of what exists there. So sometimes I have to overlook some other places because they're too similar to what I've shown.
One more thing I want to mention, where that square was, right next to it is a market, local market. So, you know, we went there because everything is bought that day for that evening's meal.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
Oh my gosh, it was amazing. But this is the part that I found most fascinating. When we went to the butcher, everybody knows the butcher, and the butcher kisses every woman. I couldn't believe it.
No, but they all kiss one another. It's and I think right now they don't do it anymore because of COVID. But it's something, and I think even more in France and in Belgium, though we pretty similar for that kind of tradition, if you want. But I know that, for example, I would go to Paris and be introduced to the friend of a young friend of mine, and he would come and kiss me immediately, boom, boom, you know, 2 kisses. That's just the welcome. So it's natural. Yeah.
And being that you're from Belgium, I'm sure you've seen the Bruges Madonna.
Which one?
The Bruges Madonna.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I showed it 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. I showed it.
Oh, I must have missed that.
Yeah. You can look if you didn't listen to the Belgium presentation. It's recorded.
Okay. Thank
so
you.
You just look at you go to the school site. It shows you program, and then you click on program, and you will have Anne Connor's recorded presentation.
Okay.
And Belgium is a part of it.
Thank you. I love the history behind that.
Yes. Oh, it's a marvelous piece.
Yeah.
Okay, no other questions? No.
I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
It was just I just wanted to thank you for doing this. I'm listening from Canada.
Oh, wow.
But I have taken classes at the school. We have a winter home in Arizona.
Yes.
So this is awesome that it's by Zoom.
Yeah.
Because I just missed a good workshop because we had to quickly get back to Canada when they shut the borders.
Of course.
And to quickly get a flight, etc. Anyway, I just wanted to thank you. And what was my question? Oh, did you take these photos? Because they're absolutely amazing.
No, and I mean, whenever we see a lot of these places I visited, but before they were good digital pictures, you know, good digital camera. So the way I present it, you can look at this one, for example. These come through either Wikipedia or others, and this is why I recognize who's done it. So you see the panorama.
Oh, I see. It's very small font. Okay. Okay.
Small, par Daniel Villafruela. That's a copy.
Yes, I see it now. Okay.
Yeah. So whenever I borrow a picture that requires a recognition, I always do it.
And I'm also very happy that they're recorded. You were just, as you were just saying, so that if we can't, you know, we have another commitment that we can't get out of to listen to you.
No. Yeah. And actually, we are even thinking once, and I don't know when it will be, but once we go back to the live classes, which I'm really looking forward to, we will still do Zoom for people that cannot attend or live too far, or as you do, you are in Canada and you want to listen to it. So this is going to be something we're going to work on when we go back live.
I think that's very good.
I mentioned
that's very good. I'm still doing my yoga classes from Arizona because they're by Zoom now.
That's great.
It's incredible. It's a new world, right?
It is a new world. It's good. You know, once we go over that thing, you're going to see that the world has changed.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. And you know, I often have a couple who go during the summer to Oregon, and they're also following me. Some people are sometimes in California, so it really widens the border.
Exactly. And we can't go to France right now, but we can enjoy your beautiful.
But that's, you know, that was the point. And these programs, this is the one before the last. These programs were really made for the summer because I knew some people couldn't travel or whatever, and so decided to go a little lighter and more touristy. This is not my forte. I'm not a tour guide, but I'm trying to get an idea. You know, we've been through Spain and the Netherlands and Belgium and this, and I'm going to next year, I'm preparing right now one for the Alliance Française, but it's going to be shown to the school in next summer on the Brittany, which is an adorable part of France. Mm-hmm. I'm also going to give Greece. So that's the kind of program I'm going to do. But starting September, we go back into art history. And
I see.
Or into my field. But it's, you know, it's going to be fascinating. We're going to finish 2021. We're going to finish the Renaissance. So we're going to have all the big names. It's going to be Leonardo and Michelangelo and Raphael and Titian and so on and so on. Just to name the biggest. So it's going to be a fascinating season.
There is a marvelous TV series on Hulu called The French Village. I mentioned it previously. It's a fictional town that was occupied by the German army during World War II. People might be interested in seeing it. It's fascinating. It's on Hulu.
On Hulu, it's his name. How is it named? What's the name?
A French Village.
Village. Okay.
There's 5 seasons and it's fabulous. The town is fictional, but it was occupied by the German army during World War II. And it's really quite interesting. So I thought some people might be interested.
Thank you, Joanne. Yeah, thank you.
Joanne, I'm sorry, I missed the channel it was on or the network.
Hulu.
On Hulu.
Hulu. Okay.
I think you might be able to find it elsewhere. You might also be able to see it on Amazon. I'm not sure, but it is
on Prime.
It's terrific.
Thank you.
So we're going to go back. So I'm going to ask you to mute yourself again, or I don't know if I can still do it. There we are. And we're going to go on as we still have another. So this is actually the largest city in the Massif Central, is Saint-Étienne. Saint-Étienne is east of Clermont-Ferrand on the Rhône-Alpes region, and it's turned to be a pretty large now industrial city. So as you can see, even there, the landscape is really pretty because of the relief, but there is little left of any archaeological or art historical value in the city. And again, they didn't pay too much attention to it when they made some new streets and so on. They just demolished a lot. So there's the leftovers of a castle. And then the Saint-Étienne Cathedral, St. Stephen Cathedral, that was started in 1273 and went on restoration until 1888, has a magnificent organ that was inaugurated in 63 and where they have regular concerts, and a very beautiful cantoria under there that dates back to the 15th century. An interesting church is called Saint-Michel-des-Lions, St. Michael of the Lions. Sorry, but somebody really wants to talk to me. Of the lions, and these is because you have these two lions on the front door that go back to the Romans. And then the landscape, that whole part, the Parc National Régional des Monts d'Ardèche. So these are beautiful areas. You can see these natural bridges along the river and the falls, waterfalls, Gorge du Casac. These are all these superb landscapes that surround that northern part of the Massif Central. This is towards the east, where in really far you can see the Rhône Valley, and you can't really see the Alps because of the curvature of the earth, unless you believe it's flat. And in the winter, you put your snowshoes and there you are in a magnificent landscape with all the pine trees covered with snow, heavy with snow. Isn't that refreshing, by the way? And here are some of these, what they call the mares. These are these lakes that are formed from a volcanic eruption. And so it's M-A-A-R, they form that mare where the water accumulates because of the rivers around. Now moving to the other region, which is the Nouvelle Aquitaine, so that's the western part. And the main cities in the West Aquitaine is Limoges. And of course, I'm sure you're all familiar with Limoges because of the porcelain. But it is also, Limoges is also on the path to Santiago de Compostela. And you can see here the scallop shelf that marks that path to Santiago. Actually, the Limousin, so all around Limoges, it's pretty much a rural region. Lots of beef farming, herds of cattle, and then that are particularly known for their colors, that beautiful chestnut red. It's also a major timber producing area. It has groves of French oak that are particularly prized to make wine barrels for the wine fermentation. As Limoges was very known for its industry of porcelain, but prior to that, it also was very known for the enamel pieces, extraordinary enamel pieces that they produced. And what you see here on the right is the neighborhood of the enamelers as a memory to that beautiful industry prior. And here are some examples of these, of that industry. You had two particular periods, one around the 12th century, and shows you some really early piece of the martyrdom of St. Thomas Becket, so becomes a reliquary. It's made of champ levé, so it means it goes behind the surface of the metal, and then it's pushed in with hammer. Then the second period comes in the 16th century and makes this extraordinary scene, very Renaissance-like, but platter with the scene of the rape of Europa on the left, and a painted plaque with Venus, Juno, and Aeneas. So these are painted enamel on copper. So after a decline around 1630, there was that competition. As you know, porcelain came on pretty late in Europe because the Chinese kept that as a secret, and everything was based on finding some kaolin. The kaolin was major. That's such a fine earth that you were able in firing it to get that almost transparent vitreous texture of the porcelain, and very resistant, fired at very high temperature. So the first porcelain, and we'll see that in the coming months when I give you on the Thursday series the 18th century, the first porcelain, because of finding kaolin, was in Meissen in northern Germany. And that again was kept as a really good secret until some people left the manufacture there and then gave the secret. And it was in Limoges that they almost first found the kaolin. And here is the site where they extracted the kaolin first. And this is one of the last kiln that you can find. This is a 19th century kiln where they would fire the porcelain in Limoges. Here's an old pictures of the Javelin porcelain factory. This was the major center for export of porcelain to the United States. And so you can see all the barrels that are ready to be sent to the US with porcelain sets in it. Three examples of lesser known type of porcelain are these. You have in 1890 the vase with impressionistic decor. And then in the center there, 1855, the biscuit of the porcelain du. So it's that white porcelain of hard porcelain. And then the cup with the dragonfly, that's more of an Art Nouveau type of pieces. Whereas Limoges, as you've seen, doesn't have much left because of, again, the urban specialists at that time didn't make any effort to keep the heart of the city. But the surrounding of Limoges are really pretty, and there are some lovely places to stay. As I show you here, the Chateau de Fontjaudran. They are kind of bed and breakfast type of places, sometimes really high level. The Chateau de Chabrouilly with a swimming pool, heated swimming pool, and so on. So if put that on your notebook in case you want to travel around Limoges. There are many chateaus around too, and some have interesting stories. This is a Chateau de Val that used to have beautiful parks around, but because of building of a dam, the whole area was supposed to be flooded and it had been evacuated, but the calculation were not quite right. And so the chateau remained as it was, lost all the parks around, but looks like it is built on an island now. A series of chateaus here, they are supposed to be 7 towers altogether, a series of chateaus that were protecting that area, the Tour de Merle. And these were feudal fortresses from the 12th and 15th century. They included castles and chapels, so 7 castles, 2 chapels, and village that were owned by 7 noblemen of the region.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Could you please repeat it?
So it was again damaged during the 100 Years' War, where the English took one of the towers and a castle in 1371. Then in 1574, the Calvinists took the citadel and established a garrison there, and then they were abandoned because of lack of comfort and fell apart. But you can still see here some reconstruction of what life would have been inside. The Chateau de Boussac is an interesting chateau because it remained inhabited, was saved by Prosper Mérimée also, who was the person in charge by Louis-Philippe to literally make a catalog of all the monuments in France that had been so damaged during the French Revolution and other wars, and that deserved to be saved. So Prosper Mérimée became quite a familiar face in the Chateau de Brissac. And it's really interesting for those of you that know the beautiful series of the Tapestry of the Unicorn. They were found in that chateaus. They were folded in pretty bad shape. And Prosper Mérimée saw it and identified them right away and saved them. So they were transported to Paris, restored, and are hanging proudly in the Musée de Cluny, or Musée du Moyen Âge in Paris, and absolutely superb, representing the 5 senses. Here's some of the interior of the chateau that, as you can see, some parts have been updated dramatically. But here are the older medieval chimneys in the salle de garde, the salle of the room of the guards, the hall of the guards. Going south now, we're going to in Occitanie, and with Cahors. Cahors is a town on the Loire River. You can see the beautiful scene with that buckle of the river just there. It's known for its very good deep red wine, has beautiful municipal gardens, and then an old bridge with 3 towers. It features, as most of these towns, a half-timbered house and then narrow alleys, as also the cathedral, St. Stephen Cathedral. Here is some ruins of Roman thermes, so baths. The cathedral, which is a very strong type of architecture with that front massive western facade, was built in the 12th century. But what is very interesting is behind that very massive facade are cupolas, which is one of the rare churches in France that has that type of architecture. In one of the cupola, you can see some frescoes, 14th century frescoes, with Christ and all part saints and disciples. And then to the right, you have the original sin and Adam and Eve. So other frescoes that you can find there. old facades. This is a Renaissance facade of the deacon, that used to be the houses of the deacon, and here a private hotel. When we say hotel, it's private house, a large house. And there is the famous Valentré Bridge with the 3 towers. And this is not unusual. Any bridge which was rare features in that time would have some posts where people had to pay a toll to go through the bridge. And so this is why you had these type of buildings. Hokkamadu is another extraordinary city in a sense similar to Le Puy-en-Velay. It also houses a Black Virgin, but it's the way it's built against the cliff. Rock Amador, so the rock Amador is because of the saint that is linked to the city, Saint Amador, and then in Latin, Rupis Amatoris. As you can see again, spectacular landscape. The city is built against the cliff, and of course you have these old medieval buildings and then the church all the way on the top. In the church, there is that very, very old statue of a Black Madonna again, or Lady of Hokkamadu, that dates back to before the 11th century. This is the very dark inner nave of the chapel of Our Lady of Hokkamadu. And on the ceiling of the chapel, you have that little bell without a hammer inside, but it's supposedly from time to time, as a miracle, is going to strike the sound. All kind of gates, the salmon gates, the porte basse, so the low gate, and then the fort. This is the entrance to what used to be the fort. So very picturesque, beautiful old town. Moving south, we're going to Conques, and I showed you Conques already because of its extraordinary church. Conques has that setting, again, it's against a pretty high hill, and you access it from a road down in the valley. So you only discover it in the last buckle when you turn around and suddenly Conques appears in front of you. It developed around the monastery of Sainte-Foy Abbey that was completed in 1120. Here is the church that is surrounded by all these old village houses. And what is extraordinary, with a rather stern architecture, very typically Romanesque, is that portal, the portal that you see down here. And that is one of these superb tympanum that you find in that region, and in Burgundy, by the way. Christ in a mandorla, surrounded by the 4 evangelists, the beast of the apocalypse. And then the description of the afterlife. So you have people coming out of the graves and then either being welcomed by the saints and the holy people, or if they didn't behave well, if their soul is too heavy, weighed by St. Michael, they go into the hell, the mouth of hell, and then welcomed by Satan. And these, again, these images, we have to remember, for people coming from their small towns, their villages, these were huge churches, and these very frightening images were supposed to bring them back to order. You can also see that this was not always in that kind of more golden stone here, but you can see some leftover of pigments. All this was painted in very bright colors. And this is a view of Conques. The whole village is absolutely beautiful. And as often there, it's a humid climate. You have that fog that almost envelopes the whole city, town. Inside the church, very typical Romanesque church, is a very famous reliquary. Again, Conques is on the way to one of the ways to Santiago de Compostela. So to attract pilgrims so that they would come by and stay there and bring them money, let's put it that way. There was a commercial reason behind it. There is an extraordinary reliquary. This is the reliquary statue of Sainte Foy. And the story of Sainte Foy is she was a very young martyr. She was promised by her father to an atheist, or let's say Hayden king of some sort, and she refused. She wanted to remain a virgin and consecrate her life to Christ. So he killed her. And that very young martyr her remains were kept in that reliquary. Now that reliquary originally was in another town, in Agen, and was brought through theft in 866 to Conques. This was the thing, you can't sell these type of relics, but it was kind of allowed to be stolen, and they were following dreams. Again, a monk would have a dream and says, in my dream, Sainte Foy has told me she wants to come and live in Conques. And then the abbé says, that's not a bad idea. She was very famous, so he goes to Agen, stays there for 10 years, makes himself a very good person, and people trustworthy person. And so finally he ends up being in charge of the relics. At that time he puts it under his arm and then moves back to Conques. So these are stories again and again that you find that was called Forta Sacra in Latin. Not far from Conques, north of Conques, is another church, an abbey church of Sainte Marie of Souillac. As you can see, the back of the church, beautiful Romanesque chevet, so these chapels surrounding the apse. This is again one of these monasteries where most of the monastic buildings have disappeared. And this tympanum was not as known, it was never finished actually, not as known as the Conques or Moissac and so on, but still is very, very special. And what is interesting is some of the sculpture shows and proves that the same sculptor that were in Saint-Pierre de Moissac, St. Peter of Moissac, south of there, came and worked here. And that beautiful sculpture here of Isaiah is so similar to what you find in Moissac. It shows that elongated shape, these very linear folds of the clothes and the feet that don't quite touch the ground. Very, very special rendering of Isaiah. And also another beautiful pillar called the Souillac pillar, where you have a mingling of animals and humans. The imagination of the Romanesque artist is extraordinary. Finally, in the south of the Occitanie, you have the city of Rhodes. Here is the cathedral, again, a very different kind of architecture. Don't look at grace and elegance of the Gothic. This has been built between 1276 and 1531. Started as a Romanesque church and then went on as a Gothic church. So you have almost fortress-like towers in the western facade, but then suddenly you have a rose window there and some Gothic finials. Inside you have a very nice cantoria. There is a beautiful Renaissance Episcopal palace. It's late Renaissance, 1694. Episcopal means bishopric. And then different buildings in the town of Hôtel Le Normand, which is now the prefecture, so the head of the department. And old medieval buildings with the little towers, the chapter house here and other places. Not far there is some interesting cave with the cave paintings. The Pechemel cave is one of the most beautiful in France. They date around 25,000 BCE. Some a little more recent, only 60,000 BCE. So before you have the hands, these where they would put the hand and then blow the dust all around it, and punctuation, so these big dots, natural formation too, and then beautiful paintings. This is a replica. They couldn't find the original here, but of horses and other hands that are displayed in the Brno Museum. And then literally a drawing of a woolly mammoth. But again, landscape is everything there. This is the Black Mountain, snow-covered, the Montagne Noire. The Bougès Montagne and the valley of the Mimont River. This is in the National Park of the Cévennes in Lausanne. You can see the spectacular, really grandiose landscapes. Les Détroits. So here is just that meandering river at the bottom with a scenic road all around. And what is known as the Gorge du Tarn is known, it's almost like a small Grand Canyon in the south of France. Gorge du Tarn Canyon offer again some beautiful landscaping take, and everything is also set for hiking. So if ever you are crazy about hiking, it's the place to go, because it's not full of tourists. It's a much scarcer population and touristic population than in any other places around France. The Point Sublime in the fall. So I hope I gave you that vision of the Massif Central. So many, many more things to discover than what I showed you. But again, I can only give you a sampling. Also to attract you there, the food. So the aligot is a cheese lover's dream. So they melt the cheese and they have some mashed potatoes with it, and you just dip into it and have these mashed potatoes that are mixed with the cheese. As you can see, just looking at it, so yummy. The poté auvergnat, hot pot dish. It combines vegetables, cabbage, potatoes, pork, carrots, leeks, and turnips. Charcuterie, so the cold cuts over there are really good and tasty, or made in farms and so on. And then not too many desserts, but the blueberry tart is one of the specialty. They have lots of blueberries there. Also apples and blackberry flognard. It's a kind of a clafoutis. For those of you that are familiar with clafoutis, clafoutis is made of fruits, and you can make clafoutis with different kinds. The basic one is always with cherries, sour cherries. And then you make a mixture of a little bit of flour, eggs, and milk or cream. And you cover the fruits with it in the oven, and it makes like mixture between the custard and the tart. The apple and blackberry flognard is follows the same principle. Cheeses, as any region in France, you have cheese, the Saint-Nectaire in here, and you can see how the wheels, the way it's aged in some caves, and then when you cut it's excellent. And you can find the Saint-Nectaire here. Cantal is a hard, it's a hard cheese, very tasty. And then different blues. The Roquefort comes from there, and here you have the beautiful cave cellars where they display the Roquefort. And the Bleu d'Auvergne also old blue cheese. Pelardon is a small goat cheese. It's really delightful. You can have it aged or rather fresh. In this case, they are aged. The wine is not a high alcohol wine because of the climate. It's not a very hot climate. And so it's going to be a little more, has more body than the Beaujolais, but it's just a pretty good table wine, though some of them are higher level. The 5% comes in different qualities. But you have rosé and red mostly in that region. So I hope I've made you discover, offer just a review of travel they did in the Massif Central. Next time, and this is the last of the series, we'll look back again at Portugal. And that's, of course, extraordinary architecture and history of Portugal. So now, please, if you want, just unmute yourself. Let me, first of all, stop the recording.